Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Podcraft. This is the show all about podcasting, from launching your show to monetization and everything in between. I'm Colin Gray from thepodcasthost.com, joined by Matthew, as always. How are you getting on, Matthew?
Good, Colin. Happy Halloween, time of recording. I see you've dressed up.
I've dressed up as a middle-aged man in an office, yes.
Me too.
You've put on your fake beard though? Oh no, wait.
Yeah. Well, if my daughter had anything to do with it, she's always trying to pull it off, so.
Yeah, I'm more beardy than normal today, so maybe that's my costume. Longer than average facial hair. That's the lengths I go to for the sake of Halloween. Well, we're back for another variety show for Podcraft, Matthew. What have we got this week? What's a wee teaser of our topics for this week?
Yeah, I mean, the big headline, we're going to talk about turning non-listeners into podcast lovers, aren't we? There's a whole avenue to explore there, a lot of opportunities for us. And then we have some stuff around gifts for podcasters. It's getting to that time of year. And then a review of the Lizard Boom Arm.
Nice. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I think the non-listener ones is a really interesting topic, actually, isn't it? Because it's so much easier to find listeners where, if you're their first podcast, you're going to be the one that they love the most. So, it's so much easier as well because they don't already have, easier and harder in some ways. Yeah. Anyway, we'll dig into it. Just to mention before we start, this content, as always, is supported by the products that we do at the Podcast Host, one of which is the Academy. So our Academy, if you run a podcast, helps you to run your show, to grow it. We've got loads of support in there. We've got our 4-minute feedback to give you feedback on your show. We've got our accountability tool, our launch, growth, and monetization blueprints, all of that stuff. So if you're growing your show just now, or even just launching, go over and check out the Academy. It's thepodcasthost.com/academy, and you'll get direct support from me, Matthew, and the rest of our team too. All right, Matthew. Right, how do we turn non-listeners into podcast lovers? Why are you thinking about this in the first place?
Yeah, this kind of started for me back in May when we were at the podcasting event in London. And you mind, we did like a few little sessions where people could book some time and talk about like things that they were struggling with. And I don't know how I ended up being a go-to person for like podcast growth, but I had a lot of people, podcasters, talking to me about that. And, I said to almost all of them, like, when you think about your target audience, it's very obvious to think of, as people that's interested in this topic that listen to podcasts. That's a simple way of going about it. But when you start to think about the folks that are interested in your topic that don't listen to podcasts, that's a whole new realm, isn't it? And not only could reaching those people benefit you and your show, it could also benefit the medium as a whole as well, can't it?
Yeah, that's a huge part of this, to be honest. I think we've been pretty good at talking about this throughout the last 5-10 years around, we talk a lot about having a good website and having a blog that goes alongside your podcast and the importance of good show notes and all that kind of stuff. All of that is really targeted towards not necessarily podcast listeners, and converting just general people who are looking for answers for questions into listeners. So yeah, if we can grow the medium, podcasting is one of those mediums. It's never been a kind of super hockey stick growth like YouTube has it. It's been, slow and steady, 2-3-4% increase every single year. So what are we up to these days in terms of stats? Do you remember? We just spotted them anytime recently.
In terms of podcasting familiarity and listenership, the stats are quite high now for folks that have listened to podcasts, have heard the podcasts. But I suppose the data that was the data that gets mentioned in Lindsay's article on this topic that was really interesting was a report earlier in the year from Sounds Profitable. It's the podcast landscape report. They surveyed it was 2,400 Americans, of which 28% had never listened to a podcast before, and they kind of looked at that percentage and broke it down. They figured that 10% of that group were unreachable, 56% were resistors, but 34% were persuadables. And they dug into, what's preventing these people, what's holding them back, what concerns, that's outside the kind of scope of this discussion. But we see here, Colin, a big opportunity, don't we? That's not an insignificant amount of folks that we could potentially get listening to podcasts.
Yeah, totally. I think that's almost underestimating it as well, in a way, because last time I looked, I think it was something like we have 25 to 30% of people who listen to podcasts listen on a weekly basis. No, sorry, of total people. So 25, 30% listen on a weekly basis, but monthly listens were still were much higher. What was it, 50, 60%, I think. So like of those, 28% have never listened to a podcast. That means 72% have listened to a podcast. The vast majority of those, not vast majority, at least more than half of those people listen like once a month. So there's so much room, I think, to persuade people who are, they know what a podcast is. They have listened once or twice in the past. Maybe they'll pick one up once a month if it's something in the news. So they know how to listen. They've got a podcast listening app. They know how it works, but they're just not in the habit. And therefore, if you can persuade them that your content is great, that it's something worth listening to, that's a whole nother group of people beyond even the people that, don't listen at all at the moment. So I would count in both. I would count in the non-listeners altogether, that 28%, but there's another 50% of people who actually, they're not convinced yet. They have listened, but they're not convinced. They're not regular listeners. So yeah, there's all of these tactics we can share. I think are potential to turn all of that group, like that 75% or so, into regular listeners. That's what we want. We want those weekly listeners, don't we?
Yeah. So I mean, anyone listening now isn't going to be intrigued at the thought of reaching more listeners. So I guess the next step is like, how do we go about it? How do we convince these folks to start checking out podcasts? What's a good first step here, Colin?
Yeah, I mean, we've gone through, how many is it in the article, Matthew? It's about 12 different tactics we've got. And all of these, they're obviously designed to try and attract more people to podcast listening. But the goal really is to listen to your podcast, naturally. So if you do these things, that's them going to start listening to your show. And like I said earlier, if you're the first show that somebody discovers or makes a habit around, that's a special place in your heart. Like, do you remember, Matthew, the first ever show that you got used to listening to? Like the first regular listen?
You know what? I don't actually. I weirdly don't. Yeah. Was it Boag World for you?
Yeah, exactly. I mentioned it before. Boag World with Paul Boag and Marcus Lillington. And the other one was Internet Business Mastery as well. That was, I can't remember Jay and somebody. We met one of them at the podcast event in the UK way back, like 10 years ago. Those two shows were what got me into it. So yeah, I think it does make a huge difference. So anyway, first one, I think, and we talk about this a lot, I mentioned a wee bit, optimizing your website for search. Like there is one way to be found in podcasting, which is in the listening apps. So getting found in Apple Podcasts and Pocket Casts and Spotify, all of those places, yeah, fine. But that's for people that are already searching for a podcast specifically. There's a vast amount of people, more than that, who are searching for an answer to their question on Google, on text search, on whatever search engine they use. So those are the people that are such a bigger opportunity, really. So if you optimize your website for search, that means creating good show notes, means creating maybe even a blog post equivalent of every single episode that you produce and publishing that on the web. And then people that are searching via text find you that way. So there's so many more opportunities to get found that way because so many more people search that way. Like, what do you think a great podcast episode website looks like, Matthew? What's on it? What do you include to make people find it, but then also listen to your podcast?
Yeah, I mean, if you're like you're saying, you're creating an episode around a certain topic, and you get them onto your site, you're going to want a player on there as sort of high up and prominently as you possibly can, aren't you? You're wanting to. I mean, the way to look at this really is you have a website and it's about your topic rather than you have a website and it's about your podcast, if that makes sense. Like, think your website as, that this is a content website around my topic. As a podcast, obviously, and we'll get to that. But first and foremost, we want folks on this website, they see what we're doing here, and then we could start to gently introduce, by the way, this is also audio content, it's maybe video content. And that kind of ties into number 2, doesn't it? About making it clear and showing them what the next steps are and how to actually get the podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah. The two go in one, don't they? Like, I think a great podcast show notes website includes the player, but the player might include subscription links as well. Even if it does, you want to have even more prominent subscription links you've just created either in your template built in, or you can add them manually, like subscribe on Apple Pods, subscribe on Spotify, whichever one you want to, other ones you want to include as well. Then you've got your show notes themselves. And this is easier than ever now. Like taking your transcript, chuck them in ChatGPT, say, create a 1-paragraph summary, and then create 3 takeaways, and then create a chapter list for me, and then create maybe like 3 other paragraphs, which are, here are 3 things that I learned from this episode. There's a great set of show notes that are actually useful just reading them. So if somebody searches that topic, Google is going to look at that page and say, oh, there's some good answers on here. There's some actual content. It's not just a summary of something. It does go into depth on the topic itself, and it does answer the question on its own, which is excellent. And that's what you need to be able to show up in search. So yeah, there's a few things there. I think if you can do that, I mean, you're obviously going to go in and edit it, get ChatGPT, create your first version of it if you want, but go in and edit it, put it in your voice, put it out there without the AI voice, and then that can work really nicely. And yeah, the clear thing there, the number 2, make it clear what your podcast is, show them how to get it. That's the subscription links. And it's the description at the very top that really says like what the larger topic of your podcast is. But they're going to get that from the idea that your episode is around. They're going to get an idea of what the podcast is around as well.
Yeah, and looking at number 3 here, I mean, maybe you're getting folks onto your website and the podcast, maybe that's going to take a wee bit more time just to get them comfortable with that idea. But, everyone that uses the internet has one thing in common. They have an email address, don't they? And email newsletters are as old as the house. So maybe they're not going to subscribe to your podcast right away. Hopefully they do, but maybe they won't. But there's a decent chance you might be able to get them to sign up to an email newsletter, isn't there? If you maybe put some incentives in there and then you've got their attention and you can kind of keep working away on them, I suppose.
Yeah. If you're creating great content, people might sign up for your email anyway, just to keep up with which podcast episodes are coming out, what topics you're covering. But even better, offer what was called a lead magnet sometimes. So you want leads in your email list. So you give them something good to make it worthwhile for them. So, some takeaways from one of your episodes, or a checklist that helps them do one of the tasks that you teach, or, a kind of cheat sheet on one of the topics that you cover quite commonly as well. Stuff like that can be real gold to hand out, that then makes it really common for people to sign up for your email list, or much more likely they will. What about number 4, Matthew? QR codes. Who ever used a QR code more than 3 years ago?
You know what? I was really late to the party on QR codes. Like, I saw them about for years without ever figuring out what they were or looking into it. But it's a really cool idea. Are they still well used, do you reckon?
I mean, I think nobody used them at all until COVID. Like, COVID was the QR code king. It brought these things to the fore, because suddenly you were using them because you didn't have to get a menu and the restaurants.
Yeah, order your pints.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. You didn't have to go and actually contact with people. But yeah, I mean, they do work. They work really nicely now. Nearly every phone has, if you just pull up your camera, that was the difference. In the olden days, you had to pull up a QR code app. It wasn't built into the natural software of the phone. So as soon as iPhones and other smartphones had, like, you just pull up your camera, take a picture of it, and it just works. That was the big change maker, really. So yeah, worked really nicely. You want a really simple QR code, stick them around the place. No, we're illegal, obviously. And then help people find your show. All right, 5 and 6 are collaboration ones, Matthew. What about collaborating with other content creators and collaborating with an influencer? What's the difference? We were talking about this before, right?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously an overlap here. But yeah, I mean, that might be, here's a person that does a blog in my topic that they're doing really well. There's opportunities maybe for some crossover. Maybe they've got a YouTube channel or whatever. But it's a great way of mutually beneficial audience building, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, general content creators are people that maybe don't necessarily lean on their own face for the brand generally. So you might find a blog that's run by a few people you can collaborate with to get your podcast out to their audience, or a podcast that's run by a few people. Influencers, maybe more that kind of individual who talks about a topic. Maybe it's somebody on Instagram or something like that talks about, say, we found one on Instagram that was doing podcasting, and they become a real face for that brand. brand, and we can maybe get our podcast on there mentioned, do something with them to get ourselves in front of their audience and get some more listeners. So yeah, stuff like that as well. If you can find anyone in your niche and your topic, see if you can find some way to offer them some value, get them in front of your audience, or do some work with them, or benefit them in some way, can get yourself in front of their audience. I suppose that ties in with number 7, doesn't it, Matthew? Social media marketing.
Yeah. I mean, I know the listener will be thinking, here he goes again. But there's obviously, as we've had Darren Lake on recently, and he broke down his process of content stacking, and he obviously uses this to great effect. That he's putting content on social that is getting eyeballs, and some of that will come back to his podcast. So there are definitely ways to do this effectively, which he's demonstrating. I think, on the flip side, if you've just got a Twitter account and you go on there and say, new episodes out today, folks, that's probably not going to get you much listens. But what do you think, Colin?
Yeah, social media. I mean, video podcasting is making this a lot easier because we're all recording our podcasts. We're not, sorry, that was a complete sweeping statement. A lot of people are not recording their podcasts on a video platform, actually. A lot of people are still recording with just audio alone. But at least if you are recording on a platform that does offer video, if you record it, you can clip that up and create clips that do make it easier to promote on social. But if you're not, you can still get on like Headliner, Wave.co. They all offer audiogram creation. So just upload your audio and create a nice little video clip, which just includes an audio wave and your artwork, stuff like that. So yeah, even if you're just doing audio, social media marketing still can be quite nice for getting your clips out there. Right. 3 more for the less techie folks, Matthew. What we got? We've got some old school methods here.
Yeah, print media. An example of this, I think it was the tail end of last year. I read the Miniature War Games magazine because I'm a big old nerd, and I had the editor on my podcast a while back, and I was talking about I could maybe write something for you, and he asked me to do a piece on podcasting because he said a lot of our readership, not necessarily a lot, but there'll be folks that read that magazine that don't know what a podcast is. So I did a piece for them on podcasting and what it is and the benefits and that. So that was just a way of accessing people that weren't listeners, and you never know, some of them might have been converted. They might have come over and checked out a few shows. So magazines in your niche, newspapers, any sort of print media, there's opportunities here, isn't there?
Yeah, totally. I think local papers are actually a really good opportunity too. They're often really kind of clamoring for good content. If you live in that area and you do something interesting, you can contribute a wee story, like just write in. Like they're much more easy to contact than the national papers. They often will publish something for you as long as you put it together in a nice way and it's something of value to the listener. Or the reader, I should say, in that case. So yeah, if you can convince people to write something about how podcasting can help you in that topic, then yeah, you could get that in the paper, no worries.
And that does tie into going back to like the website and that, because if you're writing up something like this and you could say, head on over to whatever.com to check out more, that's a lot better than saying, download Spotify or Apple Podcasts and search for my show in there. So a lot of this ties in, doesn't it?
Yeah. Get a wee QR code included in your newspaper article. That's what you want.
Yeah.
The other 2 relate as well. So events and conferences, really nice way to meet people that don't necessarily listen to podcasts, but convince them to listen, because when you meet folk there, obviously a big part of podcasting is that personality, that intimacy. It's all around you and what you stand for. So meeting people in person, so much more likely to get them to listen to your show because they already have a picture of who you are. And I often get people pushing back a little bit saying like, but I'm only going to meet, 10, 15, 20 people at these events. But that's the thing, like podcasting works with small audiences and it works really heavily on word of mouth, doesn't it? We found that even more with the recent data, didn't we, Matthew? With the discoverability survey. Or is that true? Did that come out again this year? I believe it did.
Yeah, I know people are definitely still using word of mouth, and like you're saying, when you go to an event or conference, people might say, well, 10 listeners potentially, so what? But people that go to an event or conference, they've made a big commitment to turn up to that. They obviously, there's somebody in your topic, no matter what that might be, and they probably have their own audience to an extent. So, and even if you run an interview show, this is a great way to get new guests for your podcast, which in turn helps you reach the folks that are connected with the people that you meet. So again, it's not like you go to an event or conference and you've suddenly got 1,000 download spike the next day. It's not going to be like that, but it's these long tail opportunities that could span from it.
Yeah. I think we've both had the experience where you meet somebody, as soon as you meet somebody in person, they're so much more likely to become an evangelist for your show because they know you then, they trust you. There's something different about meeting somebody in the flesh, whereby they then are much more likely to recommend your show if they become a fan of it. So you're building like these kind of super influencers that will then help grow your show in future. I think that makes a huge difference. What about guerrilla marketing then, Matthew? Is this all about going to the zoo, stealing a wee creature, taking it out in the street, putting a QR code in its back?
Yeah, you stole my dad joke there.
Yes.
Guerrilla marketing, though, I mean, my classic example is the old beer mats, the old coasters. Like we've done that so much in the past. It's a really good way. You go into a pub, you leave a couple of them on the table, and again, ties into QR codes and having your own website and all that stuff. But things like posters and that, and in Lindsay's article, she's talked about, obviously, you don't want to be vandalising anything. You don't want to be putting stickers where you shouldn't or drawing on walls or that. But I think one of her examples, she talked about a brand that used guerrilla marketing, and they basically power washed their logo into like onto a dirty wall or door or something. So in theory, they were cleaning up rather than vandalising. So as long as you're clever and respectful about these things, there's wee ways you could go about it.
That's cool. Yeah, I like that. I've seen people, temporary stuff. Like you go to events and conferences and you leave stickers, beer mats, you leave stuff lying around. That's not too bad. And even, like chalk on the pavements and stuff like that. I'm not sure what the legalities on that. Check with your lawyer before you do that, but at least it's temporary. So I'm not sure.
Fine in Scotland where it rains every day. It never lasts long.
Yeah, totally. But I do love the beer mats. The beer mats work really nicely. Any event you go to is going to have a social afterwards. So putting the beer mats around is a great idea. All right. Last three we've got. One actually ties up. I'm going to mention this one first. Local meetups ties into events. It's essentially all the benefits of running an event, but it's your event. So you have control over it. You become the kind of controller of it, the face of that event, which can breed even more loyalty, even more authority. Everyone that comes to the event will know who you are. You don't need to make the effort to meet them. So local meetups can be a really nice one. What about some other ones, Matthew? What else we got?
Yeah, creating an audio walk-in tour is a very niche option, but it has potential. It's something that myself and Robert did many years ago with a company called VoiceMap. So GPS walk-in tours, it's like people go to a city, they have this app, and they could take a couple of walk-in tours, and obviously if you've produced one, there's scope to share or mention your own podcast there as well. It is a funny one because you think if somebody's that tech savvy that they're using an app like this, there's an almost certain chance they already listen to podcasts. But it's just another wee way of throwing your show out there, creating some good content, and potentially winning a couple more folks over to it.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I loved that idea when you first told me about it. I thought it was great. And the last one on the list ties into local meetups, really, is hosting a workshop or an event, actually teaching something. The big benefit of doing that, whether it's education or workshop based, is that there's other platforms you can then list it on. For example, Eventbrite does this really nicely. So you can list a workshop, you can list a tutorial, a seminar, that type of stuff on Eventbrite, and then it shows up in your local area. It gets a free advert, essentially, and a way for people to sign up for it as well. So it can make you more visible, particularly for that topic as well. So that can be a nice one to do too. All right. Anything else to add, Matthew?
No, I mean, obviously, like everything else we mentioned, I'll put a link to the full article in the show notes, and the listener could check that out. But win some folks over to podcasting, firstly to your show, but secondly to the medium, and then everyone can benefit from it.
Yeah, great stuff. Cool. All right, before we jump into gifts for podcasters, Matthew, I just wanted to mention our Academy again, just a wee slot for it. We've got a new feature, which is really cool. 4-minute feedback, which I'm really excited about. It's just launched this week, and I'm really excited for some people to try it out. So the idea, like how many times, Matthew, have you had somebody send you a podcast, a script, anything creative like that, and say, so here's my hour-long podcast, or here's my 20-page script. Do you mind giving me some feedback? What do you think?
Yes, there's not a lot you could do with that, is there? Unless you're prepared to spend a day on it. So
exactly, yeah. So first of all, it's like tons of time for you. Second of all, you don't really know what they're looking for. Like, do they want you to make it funnier? Do they want you to make it more dramatic? Do they want you to make it more salesy so they sell more stuff? Do they want you to make it more impactful so that you affect more people? There's like so many different goals you can have. And even then, like if you do that, like it's going to be massive. The feedback is going to be too big to implement. So the idea with 4-minute feedback is that we get focused, we get really down in the depths of like one particular question. So for example, you can send us 4 minutes of your podcast. Maybe it's the first 4 minutes of the pod and you say, right, here's my intro. How can I make it more engaging so that my listen length gets bigger? So people listen to more of the show, as in increase engagement. Or maybe you send us the last 4 minutes and you say, right, how can I make more people sign up for my email list? Here's my current pitch. What could I improve about that? Or maybe it's quality. Maybe it's something around you send us one of your questions and a wee bit of an answer from one of your guests. And you say, right, how can I improve my questioning style? Give me some feedback on this. But there's dozens and dozens of ways you can ask these questions, dozens and dozens of things you could ask to improve your show. So that's the idea. And because we've made it 4 minutes, it's easy for us it's quick for us to give you good feedback, actionable feedback, and it's more direct and actionable for you to implement as well. So it's stuff that you can just do and get done. And so you can do it often. So we can do this every single week, leads to continual improvement. That's the idea. So that you can just get a bit of feedback every single week, improve your show every single week, and just keep going. So if that sounds good to you, pop into the Academy. We'd love to help you out with your show. It's over at thepodcasthost.com/academy. That's thepodcasthost.com/academy. And you'll see everything else that we offer in there as well. Tons of other stuff, from courses to checklists to accountability tools to all sorts of stuff. So we'll hopefully see you there. All right. So gifts for podcasters, Matthew, what are you buying me this year?
Yeah, I hadn't decided yet, Colin, but this article sure will help me. Maybe I'll buy you one of our own books. I'll send that to you.
I actually don't own a copy of I think I've got a copy of our growth book, but I don't have a launch one. I don't have a podcast planner. So yeah, do you know what? That'd be quite nice.
Do you want me to sign the growth book for you?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It's going to be worth a fortune if we do that. But yeah, what kind of things are in here? Like, we're not going to go through the whole thing, don't worry. But what kind of gifts could you buy the podcaster in your life? Or if you're looking for ideas for something your wife or your husband or your granny, your mum has just asked you, what will I buy you for Christmas? Here's some ideas. What we got here, Matthew?
Yeah, the aforementioned book is always a good one. There's loads of great podcasting books on the market these days. I mean, obviously we've written some of them, I like to think. We've got Finally Start Your Podcast. We've got our podcast growth book. But there's a couple of great ones from other folks too, isn't there? There's The Audience is Listening from Tom Webster, which came out quite recently. And Dave Jackson, he also has a sort of monetization Bible, doesn't he? Profit from your podcast. So lots of good options there if you're a reader, or if the person that you're buying for is a reader as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And there's even just stuff like there's so many great books that apply to podcasting, like The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I always love that, just for anything creative as well. So yeah, tons of books. What about gear, Matthew? Do we want some microphones? New mic, Samson Q2U, a PodTrack, whatever?
It's a funny one, isn't it? Like, I mean, we do talk about it, but I don't know that like you'd want to buy gear for a podcaster unless you really knew they wanted something or needed something. Because imagine you've got somebody's got the Neumann U87 and you get them the blue Snowball. That's not going to get a lot of use, is it? So this is maybe one that you wouldn't want to dip your toe in unless you're pretty knowledgeable about their circumstances. So
it's that classic problem, isn't it? Like your dad's into golf, and therefore you think, right, I'm going to buy him a golf club, and you go to the shop and you get him a golf club for 30 quid, and then you bring it home and he's like, here you go, Dad. And he's like, oh. That's a bit crap, isn't it? He won't say that. He'll grin and bear it, just like he does every time I bring him smokes. But that's it. You need to know something about it in this case. What about clothes and merch? Any good stuff there?
Yeah, I think these are a much better option, really, aren't they? Like, I mean, everyone wears clothes, or not everyone. Most people wear clothes. I wear clothes. So TeePublic, we've got a lot of good t-shirts on our TeePublic store, like sort of generic podcast related merch, haven't we? But you could get a podcaster stuff, or a podcast listener stuff from their favourite show, or you could even like behind their back create some merch for their show and surprise them with it. Again, it's a nice idea. You might have to know them quite well to do that, but it's an option.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's so many good shows out there that do list stuff on TeePublic as well. Like I love Welcome to Magic Tavern. I've listened to that for years, and they've got some great t-shirts based on all of their normal their catchphrases and their skits, so you can buy stuff that really applies to that. So if you know, I've got a friend actually who's really into that as well, so I could get him a t-shirt from that show to buy it for him. All right, what else we got, Matthew?
Yeah, courses. Would that be a good option? Get somebody a course, or maybe some software or that for their Christmas or birthday or whatever.
Yeah, totally. Tons of courses out there, whether it's podcast specific or whether it's content creation more widely or creativity. We've got a few good courses, obviously, in the Academy: Launch Mastery, Growth Mastery. The Podcast Academy as a whole could be a good gift if the people are wanting education, of course. But loads of options out there. We do have an article called The Best Podcasting Courses, which lists not only ours, but lots of other good options too. So you can find that in the show notes if you want to check out any possible courses for podcasters. And of course, software. Yeah, Alitu is our software. But yeah, loads of different software packages. I mean, imagine buying like a 6-month subscription or a year subscription to something like Alitu or any other podcast app. That'd be quite a nice little gift for any podcaster, I think.
Puts a bit of pressure on, doesn't it? You were talking about launching the podcast. Here you go. You've got 6 months to get cracking. So totally. Good for accountability. I also like RSS.com. They're a really good podcast hosting provider. They've got a great idea because they do gift cards. So you can get like prepaid 3 months, 5 months, 8 months, a year. So again, a great wee kick up the bum to any aspiring podcaster that the clock's ticking, and you need to start using it. So further down, cool. we've got some other options down here too, don't we? Like maybe the podcaster in your life is always moaning about their numbers or their growth. So there's a couple of wee things you could do for them here, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. We've got some creative ideas and some more standard, like you could buy them an ad. So buy them an ad campaign in Overcast, for example. Or you could advertise their show on Pod News, like James's newsletter, or loads of other places to advertise podcasts as well. But there was one method you tried a while back, wasn't there, Matthew, around animating your podcast? How did that go? Was that a nice wee gift?
Yeah, definitely. I really liked that. I mean, we used a couple of clips from different shows, didn't we? And it was a freelancer. I'm sure it was on Fiverr, but there'll be loads of folks that offer this service. And it was basically taking a 2-3 minute clip of it's audio, and they make it into a cartoon, and they'll obviously work to a brief as well. So just a really great wee sort of shareable clip that podcaster could then use going forward. So a novel idea, definitely one that they'll remember as well. So.
Yeah. And a last one here. What about buying something for that podcaster's kids instead that is related to podcasting? Quite a nice little thing. So you've got one here that works, don't you?
Yeah, the Yoto player. So I got this, or I should say Santa got this for my wee girl last Christmas. So she's now been using it for a year, and it's definitely one of the best things that Santa has ever got her, because it's, the Yoto player, it's a screen-free audio player, and it's card-based, so it's like little normal playing card-sized cards. plastic cards, and you can either buy stories or podcasts that are put onto those cards, or you could, if you're a podcaster or audio producer, you could create your own and you could put them on to cards for them as well. So she loves it. Like, she's always got something on, whether it's music, whether it's stories. There's always something playing on the background. It's like having a teenager already, because she goes up to her room, closes her door, and puts her music on. But she's 3 and she finds it really easy to use. And again, it's not a screen. She's not sitting looking at a tablet or that. She's just putting it on and getting on with playing. And it also, like, it has a nightlight as well. So, anyone who's got young kids will have that problem where they're coming through at 4:30 in the morning saying it's time to get up. And I could just set this, like, it's basically a sort of mild blue light all night, and then whatever time you choose, it turns yellow, and she knows that's morning time. It's a great bit of kit. 1 year on, like, it's had so much use. It was like I say, definitely one of the best things that she's ever had so far. So the Yoto player, thoroughly recommended.
Great stuff. Yeah. Does it sound good? Like, is the speaker in it good? It's the kind of thing that looks like it might not be. No, the audio is good on it. And she's got her wee, like, headphones as well. Like, there's 2 versions of it. There's a big one, which is the one that I reviewed, but we've since got her the travel version too. So on long journeys, she's got her wee headphones on and just listening to something in the background. Saves us having to listen to the Frozen theme tune when we're driving there as well. So nice. Cool. Well, there's a link to the Yoto player in the show notes, or at least in that article, our gifts article. It's right in there too. So yeah, as always, it supports our content. If you can buy these products through ourselves, that'd be much appreciated. Okay, Matthew, we're going to tie up with your lizard. Your recently bought lizard.
What a sentence. I think I talked about this on the last episode. So I got a cool boom arm for review called the IX Tech Lizard. So I've just published my review on that. And it's just a really nice boom arm, very durable, very flexible. And it can support up to 2 kilos of weight as well, which I did the maths, and that was like 3 Blue Yetis. So you're obviously not going to record with 3 Blue Yetis tied to, at least I hope you wouldn't. But it could take a real bit of weight as well. So really good bit of kit, and I talked about it in more detail in the review. Also got a mic, which I'm using just now. But yeah, that was just called the IX Tech Dynamic mic. I think I mentioned that last week as well. But really good mic, just not so great a name.
What do you think the advantage is? Because it's obviously a bit of a unique construction, the horizontal arms, as opposed to, like, I've got the Rode, the bog standard, but great, like, I love it, the Rode boom arm, and it goes up and then across. And you'd imagine that's in good form. So what's the advantage of it having it like low and horizontal like your one is?
I suppose that there's just a range of like postures or positions. It's very easy to just shove it completely out the way. And also, like, if you use we both got standing desk on, don't we? So you could raise your standing desk up, and even if your boom arm is attached to, a desk that's like a normal desk at the side, you could easily adjust the boom arm to be up at mouth level even when you're standing. So it gives you so much more flexibility.
So it can still go a good range vertically as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've got the actual numbers in the review, but you'll get to a fair old height. Like, if you're tall and standing on a soapbox, you'll still be fine.
Aye. What price is it? Is it similar kind of price as the Rode ones?
Like $70. So almost half the price of the Rode PSA 1, which is like I suppose that's the sort of gold standard boom arm, isn't it? And
is that what they're at these days? I always thought the Rode PSA ones were about $80 as well. Let me have a quick check.
We could ask the internet.
We could. I'm currently searching as we speak. Yeah, no, the PSA one's actually, it's 64 quid on amazon.co.uk. And on .com it is editing as we speak. Yeah, it's 97. You're right. It's a bit more actually, $97. So 109 list price. So
how have I made that? Yeah. How have I made that ridiculous claim in my review that it was 130? Yeah, it's shown for me.
Oh, the PSA 1 Plus is 130, but the standard PSA 1, like the one I just use normally, is 97.
So I wasn't wrong.
Models. No,
I was just creative with the truth. Sorry, Rode.
Good stuff.
Rode
Cool.
don't care. They never reply to me anyway. So
no, cool. They send us loads of stuff, but yeah, they also ignore us at other times.
it's very intermittent.
Indeed. All right. Good stuff. Thanks, Matthew. That was good. A few good articles covered there. If you do want to check them out, please do go to our show notes and you'll see links to every article that we've covered here, as well as everything else we've ever written, which is 1,000+ articles now. And again, if you want to check out the Academy, we'd love to have you there. Me and Matthew are both in there supporting our podcast. There's loads of live support, but also the tools we provide now, the courses, all that stuff. It's over at thepodcasthost.com/academy, and you can join our wonderful community. Otherwise, Matthew, shall I speak to you next week on Podcraft again?
You sure will. Yeah, it's time to go duking for apples, isn't it? Are you a get down on your hands and knees and get your face in the bowl duker, or are you a drop a fork from between your teeth duker?
Who drops a fork from between their teeth?
A man with a beard.
Is that an actual thing? That's what you do to get apples?
Yeah, I just I guess it's not that I'm one of the germaphobes, but if everyone's dipping their face in the same bowl of water, it gets a bit minging.
Cheat.
So you stand up with your hands. I don't know why you put your hands behind your back. It's irrelevant where your hands are. But yeah, fork between your teeth and drop it, and you try and spear the apple. Also, it's just really hard to bite an apple when it's floating in a barrel of water. So
absolutely,
dislocate your jaw.
Yeah, it's always the case of like, just get your head right in there underwater, jam the apple against the side or the bottom, isn't it?
Get that apple or die trying.
You're literally drowning in the thing as you're getting it. Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if that's a thing in America as well. Duking for apples. Let us know. That's the feedback we'd like this week. Please do join our community over at thepodcasthost.com/podcraft community. Thepodcasthost.com/podcraft community. We'd love to get your feedback. But genuinely, we've got our Podcraft community there now. We're seeing people stream in, so that's excellent. So yeah, join us there. Okay, enjoy the duking, Matthew. I'll speak to you next week.
Will do. See ya.
And thank you for listening out there. We'll see you next time.